The clinic always quieted down after 9 p.m. The lights in the waiting area dimmed automatically, humming softly like the tired breath of a building ready to rest. Eli liked this time of night. The chaos of the day was gone. Phone stopped ringing. The rush of coughing patients and beeping machines gave way to stillness. He could finally hear his own thoughts, though he didn't always want to. Eli was 27, a young doctor only 2 years into his residency. Night shifts weren't glamorous, but they offered space. He didn't mind walking the lonely halls, checking charts, reviewing notes. In this setting, where most people grew weary, he found clarity. Malcolm first came in on a Tuesday evening, just 10 minutes before closing. The appointment was routine, a checkup, nothing alarming. Eli glanced at the intake sheet. No urgent complaints, no red flags. A man in his late 30s, quiet, clean-cut, wearing a slate blue jacket over a plain shirt. His hair was neatly combed back, his voice low when he gave his name. There was something unusual in how he moved, slow, deliberate, as though each gesture had been rehearsed. He sat with his hands clasped, looking at the floor more than at Eli. Most patients filled the silence with nervous chatter or anxious questions. Malcolm didn't. He responded only when asked, with short but thoughtful answers. Eli assumed he was just reserved. Some people were. Still, when Malcolm left that evening, Eli lingered a few moments longer in the room. The scent of his cologne, something subtle, almost woodsy, remained in the air just long enough to be noticed. The next week, Malcolm returned. Same day, same time, another general checkup. Eli scanned the file again. No specific concern listed. Perhaps it was anxiety, he thought. Some patients felt more comfortable being seen late in the evening, when there were fewer people around. As the weeks passed, the pattern continued. Malcolm came in like clockwork, always just before the shift ended. Always calm, always quiet. Eli found himself paying more attention. He noticed the faint lines near Malcolm's eyes when he smiled, the small scar on his right hand, the way he looked around the exam room, like he was trying to memorize the corners of a space he wasn't supposed to get attached to. At first, Eli thought he was imagining it, that subtle pause when their eyes met, the lingering moment when Malcolm stood to leave but didn't reach for the door right away. There were no boundaries crossed, nothing inappropriate. Still, something hung between them, as if their interactions were layered with meaning that neither wanted to say aloud. Eli wasn't even sure if Malcolm noticed it too. One evening, Eli arrived at work already tired, his back sore from a bad night's sleep. The shift crawled. By the time the last hour arrived, he felt drained. He sat at his desk with a lukewarm coffee, not expecting anything new. Then the familiar name popped up on the screen. Malcolm, 8:50 p.m. When Malcolm entered the room, he looked slightly different. He wore a darker jacket, and his eyes looked more alert, like he had something on his mind. Eli tried not to read too much into it, but as he listened to Malcolm answer questions and saw the way he watched him quietly between responses, he felt it again, that strange awareness, a sense that something was building in the space between them. After the appointment, Malcolm stood by the door longer than usual. His hand hovered near the doorknob. "I'll see you next week?" he asked, more like a statement than a question. Eli nodded, surprised by the warmth that crept into his chest. "Sure," he replied, keeping his voice even. The door clicked shut behind Malcolm, and Eli remained still for a long while. The room was silent. Only the soft whir of the ventilation system reminded him he wasn't dreaming. It was nothing, just another patient, just another Tuesday. That's what he told himself. But the next time Eli walked into work, it wasn't the patient list or his overflowing inbox he thought of first. It was the man who always came in last. A routine had developed between them, though neither ever named it. Every Tuesday night, Malcolm appeared just before the clinic closed, and Eli would be the one to see him. It was never official, never planned. But the nurses began to expect it, and so did Eli, even if he never said so aloud. Malcolm never seemed ill. His vitals were fine. There were no new symptoms, no concerns that demanded attention. Yet he kept coming. The reasons were always vague, an odd ache in the shoulder, a question about his blood pressure, sometimes just a mention of fatigue. Always just enough to justify the visit, never enough to warrant worry. Eli pretended not to notice. He treated each visit like any other, clipboard in hand, tone neutral, posture professional. But beneath the surface, things began to shift. He started looking forward to the last 10 minutes of his shift more than he wanted to admit. The air always felt different when Malcolm walked in. The silence between them had grown more comfortable, less clinical. Malcolm no longer stared at the floor. Sometimes he would glance around the room like he was studying it, or studying Eli. There were small changes, barely perceptible to anyone else, but unmistakable to Eli. Malcolm now asked questions. At first, they were about his health. Then, gradually, they strayed further. Do you always work this late? Or, do you ever get used to these white walls? One evening, after seeing Eli sip from a cracked mug, he asked if the coffee in the staff room was as bad as it looked. It wasn't much, just fragments. But for Eli, those moments lingered. Malcolm's voice had a slow rhythm to it, like he chose each word carefully. His gaze didn't rush, and when he listened, it was as if he gave every ounce of his attention. The staff began to tease, not harshly, but with knowing smiles. "You've got your regular," one of the nurses said with a wink. Eli forced a smile and brushed it off, but inside, he felt a flicker of something he couldn't fully define. Was he crossing a line by allowing this to matter? Was he imagining the meaning in their glances, the way Malcolm's hand sometimes lingered near his own when passing a pen or signing a form? One night, Eli left the exam room, door open just a crack. As Malcolm entered, the hallway light poured in behind him, framing his silhouette. It was such a mundane thing, but for a moment it felt cinematic, like the world had stilled to let one person arrive. That visit, Malcolm didn't even pretend to have a new complaint. He sat down and simply said he felt off, a little restless, a bit tired. Eli checked his vitals, knowing they'd be normal. The silence between them felt weighty, like they both knew there was more than what was being said. Eli looked at the clock. It was 9:07. "You're my last patient tonight," he said. Malcolm smiled faintly. "I always am." The moment passed without explanation, but the air held it, like a note suspended at the end of a song. Later, when Eli closed up for the night, he walked the halls slower than usual. He paused by the waiting room, now dark and empty. The chair where Malcolm always sat still held the faint indentation of his weight. It occurred to Eli then that no chart or medical history could explain what was growing between them. There were no diagnoses for this kind of thing, just quiet moments and unspoken understanding. He didn't know what Malcolm truly wanted or why he chose Tuesday nights to show up without fail. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He wanted him to come back. The clinic wasn't built for beauty. It was a series of long, pale corridors, buzzing lights, and plastic seats. But that Tuesday, something about it felt different. Maybe it was the weather, the heavy clouds pressed against the windows, threatening rain. Or maybe it was the anticipation Eli had started to carry every week, tucked quietly behind his stethoscope and clipboard. He arrived early that day, reviewed every chart, cleaned his exam room twice. He wasn't sure why he was trying to make everything perfect. The rest of the staff noticed. "You expecting an inspection?" the receptionist joked. Eli smiled and shrugged it off. He didn't need to explain. By 8:30, the rain started. Soft at first, then heavier, tapping steadily against the clinic's glass facade. Eli watched it from his office window, the way it slid in long streaks, distorting the view outside. He found the sound calming, grounding. At 8:52, Malcolm's name appeared on the schedule. Eli felt the quiet shift in his chest, the same one that arrived each week like muscle memory. By now, he didn't even question it. But as Malcolm stepped into the room that night, something was different. He looked drenched, his jacket clinging to his arms, drops of water trailing down his collar. His hair was damp, and he pushed it back with one slow hand as he sat down without speaking. Eli offered a towel, something he grabbed quickly from the supply closet, and Malcolm accepted it with a small, grateful nod. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke much. The usual routine began: blood pressure, pulse, reflexes. But there was a tension in the air, subtle, unspoken. Something had shifted since the last visit. Then the lights went out. All at once, the room went black. The hallway buzzed with confusion. Emergency backup lights flickered to life, casting long shadows across the clinic. Eli froze, instinctively reaching for his phone to use its flashlight. Malcolm sat still, illuminated only by the faint red glow of the emergency exit sign. "Storm must have knocked something out," Eli muttered. Malcolm chuckled softly. "I guess this isn't part of the usual checkup." The glow from Eli's phone created a small halo of light between them. In that pocket of dimness, everything else receded. The walls, the world outside, even the quiet panic in the hallways beyond. It was just the two of them, breathing in the same suspended moment. Eli set the phone on the counter, letting it light the space faintly. The shadows cast across Malcolm's face made him look softer, more human, less guarded. They sat for a while in that near darkness, saying very little. The occasional crack of thunder echoed from the distance, and the hum of the building's generator created a strange sort of intimacy. "I used to be afraid of storms," Malcolm said suddenly, his voice low. "When I was a kid, I'd hide in the basement. Couldn't stand the sound of thunder." Eli glanced at him. "You're not afraid now?" "Not anymore," Malcolm replied, eyes locked on his. "Some things get easier with time." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of something heavier, quieter. Eli could feel it in the way Malcolm shifted in his chair, the way his fingers brushed the sleeve of his jacket like a nervous tick. There was nothing dramatic, nothing overt. But the storm outside seemed to mirror the unspoken energy between them. Unpredictable, building, waiting for release. The power didn't return right away. Eventually, the receptionist announced that the rest of the appointments were being canceled. Patients were being sent home. But Eli didn't move. Neither did Malcolm. "I guess I should head out," Malcolm said after a long pause, standing slowly. The dim light cast a warm outline around him. Eli walked him to the door, the hallway eerily quiet now. As they stood there, just before Malcolm stepped into the rain again, he paused. "I don't think I really came here for medical reasons," he admitted. "I think I just liked the way this place felt at night, the way you made it feel." Then he was gone, just like that, swallowed by the downpour outside, the words hanging in the air like a final note in an unfinished song. Eli stood alone in the entryway, watching the doors slowly close behind him, and he didn't feel the cold. After that stormy night, Eli checked the appointment schedule every evening with quiet anticipation. Each time, his eyes scanned down the list, stopping involuntarily at the empty line between 8:45 and 9 o'clock. But Malcolm didn't show up. Not the next week. Not the week after. The absence created an ache Eli hadn't expected. He told himself it was routine, that he was simply used to seeing Malcolm, used to their strange, word-light exchanges, the calm that followed in a man's wake. But it wasn't just that. It was the memory of how Malcolm had stood by the door, wet from the storm, admitting he didn't come just for a checkup. That moment had unraveled something in Eli he couldn't name. Nights felt longer after that. The clinic went back to its usual rhythm. Appointments, test results, fluorescent lights. No fliques, no power outages. Just quiet professionalism and the occasional rushed emergency. But Malcolm's absence lingered like a phantom. Eli would hear the door open, glance up too quickly, and feel a twinge of disappointment when it wasn't him. Sometimes he thought he heard his voice down the hallway, only to realize it was someone else with a similar tone. He hated how attuned he'd become to a man who had entered his life in fragments and disappeared just as silently. One night, he stayed late after his shift ended. The hallway lights had dimmed to their evening setting, and most of the staff had gone. He sat in the break room with a half-empty cup of coffee, thinking about the storm, about the glow of his phone on Malcolm's face, about what could have happened if one of them had said more. Eli wasn't a romantic. He didn't believe in signs. But still, he left the door to his office slightly open every night, just in case. 3 weeks passed before it happened. The clinic was quiet, the kind of quiet that came after the last patient had left, but before the night crew fully settled in. Eli was organizing charts, almost ready to pack up, when he felt the shift, something unexplainable, like the air moving differently. And then footsteps. Not rushed, not hesitant. Just steady. Familiar. He looked up, and there he was. Malcolm stood at the edge of the hallway, not holding a clipboard, not walking toward the exam room. Just standing. Watching him. He hadn't aged in the weeks away, but something in his expression had deepened. He looked like someone who had been carrying words he wasn't sure how to say. Eli set the charts down. "You're not on the schedule," he said, though there was no accusation in it. "I know," Malcolm replied, voice even. "I didn't come as a patient." There was a moment, suspended in the thin air between them. Eli didn't ask where he'd been, didn't press. He just gestured to the chair across from his desk, and Malcolm took it. No file, no examination, just two men sitting in a quiet clinic, the clock ticking gently above them. Outside, it had begun to rain again. Neither of them brought it up. Instead, they let the silence do what it had always done between them. Soften the edges, open the space, make room for something they both weren't quite ready to name but couldn't ignore. The air inside the clinic felt denser that night, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Eli sat across from Malcolm. The only sound between them, the rhythmic hum of the hallway light and the occasional distant beep from a monitor. Neither of them spoke for a while. They didn't need to. Malcolm had returned. That alone carried weight. Eli studied him carefully. The way Malcolm's fingers rested loosely against his jeans, the faint lines on his forehead that hadn't been there a few weeks ago, the subtle tension in his shoulders, like someone who had finally made a decision after many restless nights. "I almost didn't come," Malcolm said, his voice quiet but steady. Eli gave a slow nod, letting the words settle. "I told myself it was a crush," Malcolm continued. "Just something passing." But it didn't pass. Eli didn't respond. Not yet. He knew some moments didn't require answers, only space. And Malcolm was unfolding something carefully, like a fragile truth he had kept too long in his chest. "After that night, I thought I'd let it go. Just leave it. Pretend it hadn't meant what it did. But I kept thinking about the way you looked at me when the lights went out. Like the silence didn't scare you. Like you wanted to stay in it." Eli felt those words catch something inside him, an ache, an echo. He remembered the way the darkness had seemed comforting, how Malcolm's presence had made the quiet feel less like an absence and more like an invitation. "I wasn't sure what I wanted," Malcolm admitted. "And I didn't want to make things hard for you. I mean, this place, your job, it's not meant for whatever this is." Eli leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped loosely. "No, it's not," he agreed softly. "But that didn't stop me from hoping you'd walk in again." Malcolm exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and regret. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I never was. But being here, with you, even just sitting in this boring, overlit clinic, it felt like the only place I wasn't pretending." Eli smiled, not out of amusement, but from something deeper. He had spent years burying parts of himself under professionalism and responsibility, hiding softness behind sterile gloves and careful detachment. But Malcolm had stepped into that world without asking permission, and had quietly become the only thing Eli thought about when the shift ended. "I don't know what happens next," Malcolm said, "but I had to say it." Eli stood up then, slowly, and walked toward the window. Rain dotted the glass again, just like it had that other night. The rhythm of it filled the room, gentle and forgiving. "You don't have to know what comes next," Eli said. "You just have to show up." He turned, meeting Malcolm's gaze fully. No ruse, no promises, just something real in the space between them. Malcolm rose too, mirroring Eli's pace. They stood close, though not touching, both aware of the fragile electricity in the moment. Unspoken, but pulsing. There was no grand gesture, no sweeping confession, just a look, steady, unflinching. And in that look, everything they hadn't said was finally understood. The rain outside kept falling, and the clinic lights remained stubbornly bright. But for the first time, the space no longer felt clinical. It felt personal, shared. And when Malcolm stepped forward, not to leave, but simply to stand nearer, Eli didn't move away. He let it happen. Let the quiet become warmth. Let the waiting end.